Okay, so we're talking about soft power. I'll start with a softball question. What is soft power?
Well, soft power actually was coined by Joseph Nye, and he brought it together because he said that soft power and hard power equals smart power. And soft power is really the world of persuasion. So the world that we operate in. It's attracting people to your cause as opposed to putting a gun to their head and forcing them to.
Okay, so things like sanctions or going to war, obviously that's hard power.
Yes.
Soft power, give me some examples amongst nations.
So I would say, for instance, the film industry of the US, Hollywood, is a form of soft power.
Mm.
Culinary persuasion, McDonald's for some, and is also, if you look at Italian food, that is also a form of soft power. Restaurants around the world serving up sort of a delicious Italian pasta is a form of really bringing Italy and its soft power into our stomachs and persuading us that we like Italy.
Okay, so the world of marketing is soft power. In public relations, for the most part, it's soft power. Unless my company is like a fully regulated, we're doing whatever we want. And then because I've lived in that world where I have to just explain why my company did what it did and you don't have any say in that. It's like soft power attached to the hard power action. Give me some examples of campaigns that have used soft power.
Yeah, I think the way to look at soft power and hard power is a bit like the carrot and the stick. And, some situations require one and others require the other. And sometimes you need a blend of both. And so, for instance, typically, I would say, one aspect of soft power is if you look at history, the CIA allegedly they were backing an American artist like Jackson Pollock, and they did it behind the scenes. They got an art philanthropist to really host exhibitions of his work around the world because the Americans at the time were worried that they weren't perceived as having the same cultural clout of the Soviet Union. And so that's an example of how governments behind the scenes can actually use the levers of soft power during wartime, when hard power clearly was being used between in the Cold War, but soft power was also seen as an important and imperative tool in order to bring those in the Soviet Union to their sort of understanding of theirs is the better culture, the better way forward.
Interesting. And I know another example is in Southeast Asia, the beaches of Thailand are phenomenally successful. I saw online Thailand tourism did $40 million. I think it was in 2023. Those are the stats that were available. Blows away Indonesia and Malaysia collectively. Huge. Why Thailand? Are the beaches that much better in Thailand? Because at one point, Thailand and Malaysia, for example, they connect. And then Indonesia is just on the other side of that gulf that's
Well,
there.
it's kind of counterintuitive. I've been to Malaysia and it's absolutely stunning. And the reason why it lags against other countries such as Thailand in terms of tourism is something very offbeat. It's actually to do with food and restaurants. So
No.
people will automatically say, oh, well, actually, it's because Thailand advertise more. But yes, they advertise more because they have the tourism revenue that can sustain such advertising campaigns. But if you whittle it all the way down, it could come up to something very simple like restaurants. So many of us have been to Thai restaurants. And so when we see go to Thailand in our sort of travel brochure, it's not such a mental jump to then think, well, you know what? I've been to a Thai restaurant. I've tried their food. I met the Thai people who run the restaurant. They seem kind of nice. If I'm going to go to Thailand, I feel a sense of familiarity. Whereas with Malaysia, if you haven't ever tried Malaysian food, because there isn't a huge plethora of Malaysian restaurants as you have with Thai restaurants, and therefore you don't have the opportunity to meet Malaysians who may be the Malaysian diaspora running the restaurants, you then have never met a Malaysian often, you have never tasted their food, and then it is quite the mental jump to leap into the unknown and go to Malaysia when actually Thailand, funnily enough, feels familiar because you have gone to the local Thai restaurant down your road. So it's about familiarity and in your mind, psychologically de risking.
Isn't that something? So, and I know in that Edelman Trust Barometer every year, the most trusted entity is, in the exact quote is, someone just like me. I'm looking for something less foreign or more familiar, someone or something that seems to share my values. And if there's a style of restaurant, such as a Thai food restaurant, and I become familiar with the waiters and waitresses and the hostesses and maybe the owner, and the food seems, for me, it's very spicy. Thai food is, yeah, I'm ordering a glass of milk if I'm going to a Thai food restaurant, but it's my way of feeling familiar and comfortable with it. And I make choices, beautiful, my brain, I make choices that I think are completely independent of that experience, and yet they're so interwoven.
That's so true. And when you look at the personality model, ocean, O for openness, humans, we are all on the spectrum. Some are more open than the others. So some who are on the extreme side of openness, they actually like the idea of adventure travel and would want to go to Malaysia
Absolutely.
precisely because they don't know anything about it. But on the other spectrum, you've got people who actually do, they feel very uncomfortable with the other. And going to a restaurant, meeting people from the diaspora, it makes it much easier for them to embrace travel to that country.
You brought it up. So what's the rest of that personality spectrum? OSHA, was it called?
Gosh,
Yeah.
it's O for openness,
Open.
and then C is conscientiousness. And then E is extroversion versus introversion. A is agreeableness, and then N is sort of neurosis. And so it's an interesting personality because when you analyze humans and we're coming up with sort of common strategies, it's really important to understand the psychology that underpins people and their decision making. And then that will enable you to then connect with people from all spectrums, those who are open and those who aren't. Because actually, those people who aren't open, it's quite logical their position. Because if you look at it from sort of from evolutionary biology, whenever we came across somebody that looked a little bit different to us, from a different tribe, a different ethnicity, it was often because they were just about to invade your land.
Right.
And so actually, we are so wired to our sort of ancestry, and it's very relatively recent in history where races are mixing and cultures are mixing. And back in the day when they were mixing, it was often because one was taking over from the other. And so the openness of personality traits, it really represents that link to our evolutionary biology. And that's why the need for familiarity is important.
And as you're talking about hard power and soft power, what's going through my mind is I'm thinking, well, which do I use the most as a person, right? And I think I tend to default to soft power, but I'm not afraid to go to hard power when I think I need to. So it's refreshing to hear the concept is you need a bit of both. And I can think of people that either have too much hard power or, in the case of my wife, probably too much soft power. Where there are points in time where I wish she would kick me in the backside or someone at work that's causing trouble for, something like that. What are the key elements of building a soft power strategy for a corporate organization, though?
It always starts with the audience, understanding the audience and understanding what elements would be persuasive to them, and then therefore which channels that they would be sort of consuming by. And a lot of people, for instance, in corporates, they are beginning to understand that internal communications isn't just sending out newsletters, but it's also the element of employee engagement. So engaging with them, which actually means it's not about one-way communication, it's about two-way communication. Employees want to be heard, they want to be listened to, they want active listening. And so soft power to be used in internal communications and staff engagement is, I believe, an untapped resource for corporates who are struggling to engage their staff. And especially when so many of us are working remotely, we can't rely upon the water cooler moments of building culture and engagement and shared vision. We really need to utilize soft power in order to bring everybody on the journey with us with a shared vision.
That's right. Until the metaverse comes along, the water cooler is kind of gone or weakened at the very least. If it's a blend of soft power and hard power, then what are the points in time when hard power or control makes sense from a corporate communication strategy? Crisis comms.
Yeah, I would say
Yeah.
very much crisis because when I get that call on Friday at 3 p.m., it's not the time for me to go into persuasion mode. It's really your back is against the wall, you have to move fast and you have to really pull the levers and press the buttons super fast. Because of course nowadays with crisis comms, everything, runs across social media. We don't have legacy media as the only form of communications, and the immediacy of social media means you've got to move super fast. But what's really important is actually when you think about crisis comms and all of us practitioners who work in this field, it's actually the resilience of the organization and the relational capital that's been built over time through soft power is actually what really does save the day during a moment of crisis. Is when everyone comes together, everyone works in sync, and there is ultimate trust between the various different players when you're coordinating during a crisis.
So that's awesome. But all that soft power that you did, how do I measure it to prove that it had impact after my hard power crisis comms campaign? Because to the CEO, looking at the dashboard, right, their piece of paper, or it's all digital. Um, they're looking at, well, we did this for crisis comms and we got this result. Yeah, we need to do more of that, right?
Absolutely.
Sorry to default to the male voice for the CEO. That's could be any voice.
Do with CEOs, what I often say to them is I often say to them, look, you need to have what's called reputational resilience, which in essence is trust with your stakeholders and goodwill. Because when a crisis happens, when you make a mistake, because we're all human, you want to ensure that your company and can move on positively and bounce back fast. Now, if you haven't made any effort with your stakeholders, they don't know who you are, they don't know what you stand for, they haven't seen your consistent walking the talk and ensuring that there's no values gap. So if and when you do make that mistake, you have an understanding ear of your stakeholders, as opposed to just being seen through the prism of that one mistake.
I totally get that. But are there any magical ways for me to quantify the value of my soft power campaign? And I get part of that is the outcome of the crisis comms that we
Yeah,
had to do, but it's awfully hard to connect those dots if it's
it is.
quantification.
Yeah, it's so hard. And one of the tools that we often use are we do perception audits. So
Oh,
we go to the different stakeholders and we ask them a series of questions about their perceptions of different aspects of the company and its leadership. And what we try and aim to do is to ensure that the perception audits are done regularly throughout the year. So you can start to plot on a graph what impact certain events happen on, as well as certain campaigns. If you are running a soft Power's stakeholder engagement campaign, you can then chart to see if there's any movement in terms of perception and trust. And so running these perception audits are critical, and particularly if you run them continuously as opposed to once a year, because then you can't really sort of extract any sort of insight from it. So perception audits, I think, are definitely important. Also, the way that you run perception audits, having a third party to run the perception audits, because people sometimes feel quite embarrassed speaking directly and honestly. You see that with elections. People sometimes often say that they voted for one candidate when they voted for the other because they're embarrassed to admit to it. You have the same thing with perception audits. So it's really the crafting of perception audits. Who carries out the perception audits? Ideally, third parties, and ensuring that the timing of the perception audits are done in a way that you can extrapolate insight, and having it before and after campaigns are incredibly useful.
I want to ask about leadership styles because my sense would be the trend has been toward more soft power leadership styles and away from hard power, which feels like it goes back to like the 70s and the 80s, because the 70s and 60s, because in the 80s, when I joined the workforce, there was already this movement toward listen, listen, listen. But when I look at the governments that are being elected around the world, and I won't name any in particular, boy, it sure feels left or right that the campaign style, at the very least, is hard power. Where are leadership styles going? Are we in a phase where we're starting to shift toward more hard power style?
I think it shifts because you have some leadership styles, like you had Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, and she was very sort of, empathy led, and she felt as if there was a space for her leadership, and she didn't have to revert to sort of very common stereotypes of what it means to be a leader. And then on the other spectrum, you have other political leaders that are considered strong men, and there is an appetite for that. And what we're beginning to see is actually instead of a homogenous style of leadership, what we're seeing is authentic leadership, as long as it's authentic to the actual person themselves. And so if you have Jacinda Ardern automatically taking on this strongman persona type, or you have Trump all of a sudden talking about empathy, you're going to have cognitive dissonance. So what you're beginning to see with leadership ultimately is authenticity, or perceived authenticity, that they are being who they are. And I think there is an appetite for a wide array of leadership styles. People just want to know that you are who you say you are. You
Hmm.
stand for, what you actually say that you stand for. And that's what they're looking for. And I think people can be fairly forgiving about how you are on the spectrum of sort of empathy led versus, strongman led, as long as you come across as authentic. And that is obviously very different than being authentic.
Absolutely. And I suppose if you're in power, soft power, there's going to be a component of what you're doing. And if you're in opposition, the hard power is probably the stronger component of what you're doing, just by the nature of what those two things are. Really appreciate your time today, Farzana. I enjoyed this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Doug.